What's happening, people? It's Scottish Explorer. Today we're visiting Balrossie School, also known as Balrossie Orphanage. It was built in 1899 as an orphanage for sailors' orphans. It was commissioned by the Sailor Orphan Society of Scotland. It was the first orphanage built by the group. The orphanage was built to house 82 boys and 32 girls. In 1931, the section of the home reserved for boys was closed as relatives of the boys who had previously not wanted anything to do with them would now receive a weekly government allowance for looking after each child. The section for the girls continued to operate until 1934. The orphanage provided shelter and care for orphaned, abandoned or neglected children. It offered basic schooling and vocational training. It also provided them with food, clothing and accommodation. It was then used by the Boys Brigade prior to World War II as an outdoor training centre and headquarters for light anti-aircraft during the war, and that was in 1945. In the 1950s, it expanded facilities including new dormitories, classrooms and recreational areas. In 1960, it became a boarding school. The school focused on children with emotional and behavioural challenges. It provided a controlled environment for children deemed at risk, evaluated and treated children with complex needs. The children would have a daily routine, and here it is. 6 o'clock, they would wake up. 6:30, they would do their morning prayers. 7 o'clock would be breakfast. 8 o'clock, the classes began. 12 p.m. was lunchtime. 1 o'clock, the afternoon classes started. 5 o'clock, they would have their dinner. 6 o'clock, they would do their evening prayers and have quiet time. And 9 o'clock, it would be bedtime. There was strict rules put in place. Here are some examples. No talking during the meals. Not leaving the dormitories without permission. No physical contact between residents. Strict punishment would be for misbehaving. Limited access to external communication. The staff would punish them by spanking and caning them. They would also lose their privileges. They would have to do extra chores. Also, they would put the kids in isolation and they would reduce the food portions. The children would go to sleep in overcrowded dormitories. Some children would have to share their own bed. The children wouldn't have their own privacy and their own personal space. From 1960s to 1990, there was allegations of abuse happening in the school. The allegations were physical, emotional abuse and sexual abuse, staff misconduct, neglect and poor conditions. Residents reported severe beatings, verbal abuse, isolation and sexual exploitation. The staff members would use inappropriate behaviour. They would also give the children tiny portions of food. They would give them limited meal options. Allegations were made. Children were going to bed hungry due to lack of food. Limited access to fruits, vegetables and whole foods. It was also said the food was served in dirty conditions. The consequences of this would mean children would have digestive issues and anemia. They would also have weakened immune systems. They also suffered emotional distress and trauma. Let's talk about more into the depth about the allegations. The children would get regular beatings with the belt from staff members. Residents suffered physical injuries from abuse. Children were forced to perform physically demanding tasks. They would also get constant belittled and verbal attacked by the staff. They would control the children by intimidation. Several former staff members were convicted of abuse-related offences such as physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse and neglect. William McLean, former housefather, was convicted of physical and sexual abuse. In 1991, he pleaded guilty and he was sentenced to 4 years in prison at Glasgow High Court. James Chalmers, former care worker, he was convicted of physical and emotional abuse. In 1992, he was sentenced for 2 years. John Smith, former teacher, was convicted of sexual abuse. In 1995, he was sentenced for 5 years in prison. Thomas Brown, former care worker, convicted of physical abuse. In 1997, he was sentenced to 18 months in prison. Over 20 staff members were investigated for 20 abuse-related offences. Multiple charges filed, including physical, emotional and sexual abuse. Some staff members faced disciplinary action but not prosecuted. I was curious to find out if anyone died at Balrossie orphanage, and here's what I found out. In 1918 to 1919, multiple residents died during the Spanish flu pandemic. In 1953, a resident died in a fire at the orphanage. A child died falling from the balcony in 1967. In the 1970s, there were suspicious circumstances of a death. Allegations of abuse contributed to at least one resident's death. In the 1980s, there were unexplained deaths. Investigations suggested potential links to abuse. In 1997, the school closed due to financial and operational use, financial difficulties and funding shortages, declining enrolment, staffing challenges, also poor inspection reports from HM, non-compliance with educational and care standards, the physical conditions and safety concerns. The building was deteriorating. Safety concerns due to outdated facilities. It was reported that the children would protest against the staff by doing hunger strikes, refusing to attend the class, refusing orders and sitting silently. They would also fight back the physical abuse, attempting to escape or run away, or they would damage school property. In 1967, residents staged a mass protest over food quality. In 1970, children reported escaping and attempting to flee. In the 1980s, residents testified about abuse during investigations. The children had limited contact with family and home life. Occasional weekend visits, typically once a month, depending on behaviour and staff discretion. When it was the summer holidays, some children spent 2 to 4 weeks with family or foster families. At Christmas time, the children were only allowed a short visit at home, usually 1 week. The children needed staff approval for home visits. The staff would monitor phone calls and letters. A lot of the children suffered separation anxiety and emotional detachment. Boys and girls attended separate classes. Boys and girls ate in separate areas or different times. They also had separate playgrounds. Boys and girls attended church together, but sat separately. The only time they could interact would be at special events such as annual parties or concerts, or supervised walks or outings. And if they did mix together, they would get physical or emotional punishments. The children would get a bath once a week, and it was a strict time limit, and it was 10 to 15 minutes. The water would be cold. The staff would monitor them in a bath. There wasn't any heating in the bathrooms. They would occasionally have group showers which were monitored by staff and had a strict time on it, 10 to 15 minutes. They had limited soap and toiletries, children often shared. The facilities were rarely cleaned and also had poor ventilation. When I entered the building, the second room on your left, I got a very cold chill down my spine. I could tell something bad happened in here, and it wasn't a very nice feeling. I have been in a lot of buildings and never felt this before, so I definitely knew this place had bad history. It angers me knowing that all this stuff happened in here and little was done about it. Anyway people, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, give it a wee like please. You will find the information on news articles about the history and the abuse that went on at Balrossie orphanage